This is the first time I'm going to have to admit this on this channel, and it probably won't be the last, but I was wrong. I was wrong about the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. I made a video after the first posters for the movie were released, before the god-awful trailer came out. I predicted that the movie was going to be absolutely terrible, recommending other forms of Sonic media that you could enjoy outside of the movie. While I still stand by the things I recommended, having just seen the Sonic the Hedgehog movie, I can say with complete surprise that it was actually good. I was totally ready to write this movie off and just not see it. I had no investment at all in its quality or its success, and honestly, I was just hoping it would disappoint quietly and disappear. At best, I was hoping it was going to be like the Super Mario Bros. Movie and be enjoyably bad. But that didn't seem likely, because that movie's charm comes from incomprehensible creativity and the magical mustache of Bob Hoskins. I was content to sit back and ignore Sonic, like what I planned to do with The Rise of Skywalker. I was completely apathetic to the outcome. Much to my surprise, upon release, Sonic actually got positive reviews. At first I thought it was just people happy that it was average and not a complete disaster. But then I had several friends who also like Sonic that went and saw it and confirmed to me that they actually enjoyed it. At that point, I had to go and see it for myself. So I grabbed a friend and went in pretty much blind. So how was the Sonic the Hedgehog movie? Well, I have to agree with a lot of other people and say it was pretty good. The movie itself is a mixture of a buddy road trip comedy and E.T. It doesn't follow any specific elements of the Sonic canon, but considering the closest thing the Sonic universe has to actual continuity is the comics, it's probably better that way. There are some elements here that may seem familiar to fans who are aware of Sonic's original American backstory and know a little bit about the series Bible, but most of that is only really in passing. I'd be ready to believe that any of these similarities were purely coincidental, but there are plenty of Easter eggs in the movie that give the impression that the filmmakers at least tried to familiarize themselves with the source material before they began. In the movie, Sonic is a supersonic hedgehog from another dimension. He came to Earth as a child to escape those who would misuse his super speedy powers, which in this case is a group of echidnas that are probably going to cause Ken Penders to file another lawsuit. Sonic is forced to run using magic rings, which in this movie are basically just functioning as warp rings. And he hops dimensions into our world, ending up in the Pacific Northwest near the fictional town of Green Hills. Sonic needing to stay hidden for his own safety is what helps establish an early emotional connection with the character, as we see him watching people in the town, learning their routines, giving them nicknames, and imagining that he's one of their friends. This beginning is how I knew that this movie was going to beat my expectations. It was barely 10 minutes in, and it was already making me feel something. It might not be the most original writing in the world, but it was effective and it made me want to see where things were going. I really give a lot of credit to the redone character model for the quality of this movie. I know a lot of people are spinning this narrative that everyone needs to see the Sonic movie because the studio actually listened to the fans and made a change. And while I agree with some of that, I don't think you should ignore the flaws in a movie just because the studio listened to you. There are a lot of people that are heralding this as the greatest video game movie ever made, and I can't help but feel like at least some of that is disingenuous. Regardless, a lot of this movie rides on Sonic's likability. He's endearing and fun, and our sympathy for him allows him to get away with acting like a little shit at certain times during the movie. I was worried that Sonic's character was going to fall into the trap of being like his 90s counterpart, and just being so extreme and spouting catchphrases like way past cool. Instead, his cockiness and attitude is just one part of his personality, and he's been made a lot more three-dimensional by his fears and vulnerabilities. Most of the movie's plot on the surface follows him trying to get his rings back so he can escape to a different world after accidentally alerting humanity to his presence. But the real story here is about his loneliness and wanting to experience the world he's been hidden away from his whole life. It's about him making his first real friends, who will help save him from being captured, but will also save him from being alone. It's a story with an actual emotional core, and it would not function with a main character who looks horrific and off-putting. I cannot imagine sitting through this movie trying to sympathize with this monstrosity. Sonic 2020's writing is good, but not that good. It also seems from the trailers that Ben Schwartz re-recorded at least some of his dialogue, which helps Sonic be more cartoony and less realistic, which ironically makes him a lot more human in the long run. Adding in the goodwill from fans the changes generated, I definitely think this movie would have been the train wreck we all expected if the changes weren't made. Considering how late these changes came, I kind of hope they release an original cut as a special feature on the Blu-ray or something. It would probably sell a lot more copies, and it would be really fun to compare just how differently the two edits would feel. But Sonic is not the only character in this movie. This is a live-action adaptation after all, and that means we need to cram in as many human actors as we can. This is another part of the movie where everything went a lot better than expected. James Marsden is great in his role as a small-town cop with aspirations of taking on real crime in the big city. He does a great job of establishing a friendship with Sonic and making it feel believable. The straight man role he takes in their dynamic is what generates a lot of the best comedy within the movie. I was expecting a lot of topical references and cringy humor, but save for a few times in the movie where Sonic flosses, there isn't really that much dated pandering. They are in there. One of the jokes I really laughed at was Sonic making a Fast and Furious reference, but I would also argue that those movies have been around so long that they transcend any one era. Marsden's wife in the movie is played by Tika Sumpter, who also does a really good job. She doesn't have a ton to do in the actual plot of the movie, but she makes an impression regardless. The relationship between the two is cute, and it adds an immediate likability to both of them. They were both a lot of fun to watch, and I'm glad I enjoyed the scenes they were in, instead of them just being me waiting for us to get back to the actual movie. These movies really can be make or break based on the performance of your Shia LaBeouf, Mark Wahlberg human insert character. So the fact that both Marsden and Sumpter seem like they're actually trying and enjoying what they're doing did a lot to help keep me invested. Between these three, we have protagonists who are likable, sympathetic, and I actually want to see achieve their goals, which is more than I can say about other movies I've seen in the past year. But a movie would not be complete without its antagonist. And that leads to the last piece of the puzzle, Jim Carrey's performance as Dr. Robotnik. Now I'm going to preface this by saying, I don't really like Jim Carrey's comedy. There are cases where I think it works, like Liar Liar and The Cable Guy, and then there's everything else. I liked him in The Truman Show and Man on the Moon, and I do think he can be a legitimately good actor, but I generally find his shticky bullshit of flailing around and making goofy faces at the camera and doing silly voices to be a lot more annoying than it is funny. But I know there are a lot of people out there that don't feel that way and genuinely love his style of humor. I can't say that Jim Carrey is a bad part of the movie because it's a very subjective element. I didn't hate every moment he was on screen. He definitely made me laugh more than once, but for me, he was the least enjoyable part of the movie. From an objective standpoint, Carrey definitely seems to be trying and not just phoning things in. I heard someone I know say that he carried the movie for them. So there's definitely people out there that love his routine and will see him as the high point. I'm just not one of them. In my opinion, watch the trailer because it's pretty much exactly the same as how he acts in the movie. If you're like me and it makes you cringe, just know that it wasn't bad enough or frequent enough to keep me from enjoying the experience as a whole. Robotnik himself is a perfectly serviceable antagonist. He basically operates out of a big truck and sends out drones, which are actually labeled as badniks in a very brief blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment. And while the aesthetic design of these differs greatly from what you would see in the games, they do actually get pretty creative in what they can do. There's also something akin to the Eggmobile that shows up towards the end, but you're making a mistake if you go into this movie expecting any real connection to Sonic as a video game franchise. And that's really my biggest takeaway from the movie. Don't expect a connection to the games, and you'll be alright. I went into this movie with no expectations. I didn't go in hoping it would be good. I didn't even go in hoping it wouldn't be terrible. I went in more out of curiosity than anything else. I did a similar thing with Rise of Skywalker, although I didn't go by choice, and I think my lack of expectations helped that movie too. Not caring what terrible decisions were made, or what glaring plot holes and inconsistencies were shoehorned in, or what characters were ruined, cast aside, or completely misused, let me laugh off the worst parts of what I was seeing and look for rare positives to enjoy. I came into Sonic no longer expecting a train wreck, but not expecting something good. I didn't care about it being faithful to established canon. I mean, have you seen Sonic's arms? And I didn't care how well it represented the franchise or if it respected the fans. I just wanted to be entertained, and the Sonic movie did that. It was a fun movie that used elements of Sonic's character and world to tell its own separate story with good acting, good action, and enough of a genuine emotional core that I stayed invested in the characters until the very end. It's not a masterpiece, it's not some cultural touchstone, and it's not something that I would recommend to anyone that isn't already a fan of Sonic, or at least a fan of one of the main actors or actresses in this movie. I don't know if I would go out of my way to watch it again. I know I'm going to watch it again because I have a friend who really likes Jim Carrey and didn't get to see it the first time. The fact that I'm looking forward to that instead of dreading it should act as at least some kind of endorsement. So that's it. I was wrong. I liked it. What once looked like a steaming pile of garbage actually turned out to be a pretty decent movie. If you're a fan of Sonic, or James Marsden, or Jim Carrey, I think you should go see it. Just remember that if you do, you're no longer legally allowed to see Birds of Prey.